A reading from the Acts of the Apostles. Since he wanted to find out what Paul was being accused of by the Jewish people, the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and the entire council to meet. He brought Paul down and had him stand before them. When Paul noticed that some were Sadducees and others were Pharisees, he called out to the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees, and I am on trial concerning the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, the dissension began between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, or angel, or spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge all three. Then a great clamor arose, and certain scribes of the Pharisees group stood up and contended, "We find nothing wrong with this man. What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him?" When the dissension became violent, the tribune, fearing that they would tear Paul into pieces, ordered the soldiers to go down, take him by force, and bring him into the barracks. That night the Lord stood near him and said, "Keep up your courage, for just as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so must you bear witness also in Rome." The word of the Lord. Now, I find this a fascinating little bit of courtroom drama here, and want to acknowledge Paul's savvy in this moment. You see, Paul's been going around the community talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the Lord and the Messiah, which is, of course, angering those who don't believe that Jesus was resurrected from the dead and don't believe that he is the Messiah. So he's brought before this group of people, knowing that they're all turned against him and focusing on him as their enemy and him as their external threat, while they're not paying any attention to the fact that there's division and disunity within themselves. Paul is quick to notice it, and so he takes advantage of that in quite a little savvy moment there, where he raises his hand and said, "All I'm doing is acknowledging the existence of the resurrection," which is, of course, if you look at one of the divisions between the Pharisees and the Sadducees were more of a higher class from the aristocracy, more closely associated with the temple. The Pharisees, which is the offshoot through which the modern day post Second Temple Judaism worship in the synagogues comes from, believed much more in a literal interpretation of the Bible, with the spirits and God being present and moving among them and promising, among other things, bodily resurrection. Whereas, again, the Sadducees would have thought of that as probably being more allegorical, metaphorical, and less mystical. So Paul holds up a mirror at this community and has them look at the division within themselves. And it's kind of a reversal of that thing that we know can happen when you have two groups that are engaged in fighting with one another, and they will turn their attention on a scapegoat, maybe a common foe. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, maybe. And Paul does a reversal on this, where he says, before you go attacking me, look within yourselves and see that you among yourselves aren't in agreement, and tend to the log in your own eye before you worry about the speck in your neighbor's eye. It does make me wonder. I hear a little twinge of liberation theology in this. The idea that that person who is oppressed or marginalized or persecuted is actually the person who has a special insight to where there is dysfunction within the realms of power. And liberation theology goes back to this idea that those who are in the center of control, the center of power, could actually learn a lot by listening to that person on the margins. What would it be like in my life, your life, our community, if we look at the person for whom the system is not working, for the person who is being targeted or oppressed or persecuted, and we hear for them, what is their view on where our system is not working. And what could we learn from that? Maybe our eyes would be opened to our own work that we need to do on ourselves, just like the Pharisees and Sadducees' eyes were open to the work that they needed to do amongst themselves. And incidentally, would also turn away from persecuting those on the margins like Paul. Amen.